Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3 at 6:35. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3 at 6:35. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing, 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 testing.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3 at 6:35. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing, 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 testing. Mic check. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good evening and welcome to the third and final budget forum for the St. Louis Public Schools. My name is Angie Banks. I am the Chief Financial Officer, but unfortunately, our Superintendent, Dr. Kelvin Adams, will be unable to join us for the chat this evening. I will present the presentation in its entirety before we go to the chat, and Mr. Ryan L. Jackson will be moderating the chat questions for us. This is a condensed version of the presentation that I gave to the board on March 9th. We'll start off with the revenue assumptions for fiscal year 2022. There are some basic uncertainties regarding the general operating fund or budget, GOB as we know it as, regarding some legislative risk and also some pandemic-related risk. But we are assuming a revenue for our general operating budget of $287 million. In our local GOB revenues, we anticipate higher assessed valuations due to the hot real estate market that we're experiencing and a 0.5% increase in our property taxes. However, our sales taxes, we anticipate a 3% decline. Building sales, 25% increase. Our state revenue, we anticipate a 33% decline in our state aid, which includes our basic formula and classroom trust. Transportation and high need fund within state, along with all of our federal revenues, including E-rate, Medicaid, and the military reimbursements, we assume will be flat as compared to the current year projections. We budgeted 12 local grants under local grants to the tune of $9.8 million. And the three major categories in local grants include the St. Louis Public Schools Foundation, the Parsons Blewett Memorial Fund, and the Jacob and Sally Simon Endowment. However, there are a few other local grants within that category. We budgeted $73.8 million under state and federal grants. You can see we have quite a few grants under state and federal. The entitlement grants, including all of our title funds, special education, Perkins, and a few other, we don't have our allocations for yet, so we will be using some estimates. However, a few grants to note include food service. We do anticipate that next year we will return to the National School Lunch Program, which will increase revenues for next year versus the summer feeding program that we've been under since the pandemic. Also, the ESSER II funds, we're budgeting 20 of the $46 million that we've been allocated in fiscal year 22. In our debt service budget, we have $30.1 million in revenues budgeted, consistent with the increase in the property taxes. Now we'll move on to our expenditures. Of course, we'll begin with payroll because that's the largest percent of our expenditure budget. Some of the major initiatives in payroll are related to the consolidation upgrade plans, including an increase of 27 elementary reading teachers for a cost of $1.5 million, 20 additional staff for the virtual K-8 program for a cost of $1 million, and 71 additional support service positions as listed for a cost of $2.6 million. We also anticipate some costs associated with the literacy, professional development, and support, but that will be primarily some extra service costs. We have done some restructuring in the central office, which will result in a reduction of 13 positions with a cost savings of $1.1 million. We've also budgeted for fiscal year 2022 a salary increase of 3% for full-time actively working staff. That will cost approximately $5.3 million. We did increase the minimum wage to $13 per hour in January of 2021. That will go up to a minimum of $14 in January of 22 and $15 in January of 23. Since the general operating budget represents the largest percent of our budget, payroll obviously is going to represent the largest percent as well. The basis of the GOB staffing is our school staffing model, which is DESE, a Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The pupil teacher ratios, or PTR, are used along with projected enrollment for the year. You can see here the various pupil teacher ratios based on grade level. So for example, in a preschool classroom, there could be up to 20 students per classroom where there would be a teacher and an aide. So the Human Resources Staffing Guide provides guidelines for all of the general operating budget staffing positions. You can see it identifies the different types of teachers, aides, administrative positions, and student support positions. This would be both at the elementary, middle, and high school level, as well as the alternative type schools. Other general operating changes, non-payroll for fiscal year 2022, include an increase of 15% to school discretionary budgets, which will cost about $450,000. Listed here are the per pupil allocations at the higher level. So for example, the preschoolers at $115 per preschooler. In the current year, the allocation was $100 per preschooler, and so forth. In our alternative and specialty schools, there is not a per pupil allocation, but more of a fixed allocation. Those have also been increased by 15%. And due to the complexities of this year with the pandemic and the consolidation, we are allocating these budgets for the schools in the various allocations shown. So depending on their students, how many they have, they would receive the per pupil allocation, and we would split that allocation into the meeting expenses, supplies, and so on in the following percentages. Principals will have the option to transfer these funds from one category to another, consistent with their school plans. Here's an example using those allocations. For an elementary school that had 50 preschoolers and 300 K-5 students, they would receive a total of the $5,750 for the preschoolers and the $43,125 for the K-5 students, for a total GOB allocation of $48,875, which would then be split out in the various categories per the previous slide. Other GOB initiatives for fiscal year 2022 include an increase in nursing supplies of $60,000, a new textbook adoption for reading and literacy for $500,000. Several facility updates, $2 million. The senior work experience, where seniors will have an opportunity to have paid internships, $1 million. There will be advanced and virtual options new for high schoolers next year. And we also have financial system updates for $1 million. So for the local grants, we mentioned that there was $9.8 million that was budgeted. Here are the three major grant categories. St. Louis Public Schools Foundation has $7.7 million. They include several grants for early childhood, student technology, career readiness, and various student support initiatives. Parsons Blewett, at about $1 million, has several teacher and tuition-focused grants. The Simon Endowment at $500,000 supports technology and equipment for our special education students, primarily at Nottingham, Gateway Michael, and Madison. So there are no per pupil allocations for these local grants. Many of them have a very specific focus, could be gifted or reading. It might be for specific schools only, or they may require applications. So for these and other reasons, you'll never have an equal per pupil expenditure at the end of the year. For the state and federal grants, there will primarily be a continuation of staffing and programming from the fiscal year 2021 or the current school year, plus the addition of the 27 elementary reading teachers at $1.5 million and 2 additional family community specialists for about $75,000. We mentioned the $20 million in ESSER funds that will be budgeted in fiscal year 2022. Those funds will be primarily used for personal protective equipment, new and damaged equipment replacements, and to offset any general operating budget deficits. Similar to the local grants, there are no per pupil allocations out of the state and federal grants overall. Again, there are differences in focus, and even with the entitlement grants, there are differences by school based on poverty levels and the census data. Our debt service fund balance has been declining for the past few years. However, starting next year, there should be a surplus based on our current debt structure. Principal and interest payments will decline about 20% to the tune of about $6 million. This will put us in a good position to consider a no tax increase bond issue valued at $150 to maybe $200 million. You can think of Prop S and all the different type of capital projects that happen during Prop S. We have an opportunity to do more of those with another no tax increase bond potentially. In addition, we have 2 bond funds that are available to be refunded or refinanced at a lower interest rate, which could save the district about $400,000 over the next several years. So here are the preliminary fiscal year 2022 revenue and expenditure budgets by category in comparison to the fiscal year 2021 projected totals and the fiscal year 2020 actuals. Your top green row are your revenues, and your bottom green row are your expenditures. So just a couple items to note. In fiscal year 2022, you'll note that the general operating revenues and expenditures are the same at $287 million. This is because an anticipated deficit in GOB is offset using the ESSER funds. So that deficit actually is being picked up in state and federal grants using the ESSER funds. The roughly $10 million increase in state and federal funds are due to that $20 million of ESSER funds that are being budgeted, as opposed to the prior year. In fiscal year 21, this is the last year for the SIG, or School Improvement Grant Funds. Food service, you'll notice a stark difference in both the revenues and expenditures. As I noted, in fiscal year 22, we anticipate returning to the National School Lunch Program. So you see those increased revenues and expenditures versus those in the current year under the summer feeding program. So fiscal year 2022 revenues total $400.7 million for about a 7% increase, or $26.2 million from the current year. The fiscal year 22 expenditures are $395.5 million, or a 6.4% increase, or $23.7 million increase from the current year. Here is a view of the fiscal year 2022 revenue sources, the largest being local at 77%, and more specifically, of those local revenues, nearly 82% are from property taxes. Federal revenues come in at a far second at 18%, followed by state revenues at 4% and county at 1%. Here's a similar view of the fiscal year 2022 expenditures by major category. As expected, salaries and benefits represent nearly 66%, the largest percent of the budget. The next largest area is purchase services at 20%, which includes all district contracted services, both large and small. Most of these lie in the operational side of the house versus the academic side. The expenditures are rounded out by supplies and materials at 6%, debt service at 6%, and capital outlay at 2%. So this really concludes the presentation. So enter your questions in the chat, and we will go and answer questions live. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mrs. Angie Banks. Good evening to those who have joined us, and greetings as well to those who will watch later. Currently, we are reporting no further questions.
Wonderful. Well, we certainly thank you for joining us at the budget forums over this past week. We look forward to any questions that you may enter over the next period while the window is still open. Please go to Let's Talk on the website. If you have any questions, we'll be looking forward to responding to them. So good night and thank you.